It's not really about whatever the problem is. It's about being heard
Yeah.
and having that experience with the most important man in the daughter's life or a son's life, but the most important man, giving them that respectful listening, because that's what they're going to find familiar to attract. They're going to be attracted to that as an adult, and you want that.
Men's Alliance is tribes across the nation that meet weekly for rugged outdoor workouts and real-world devotions around a fire. We are changing what Christian men's ministry in this country looks like. And when you're ready to challenge yourself physically and spiritually, join us at men'salliancetribe.com. Welcome to the Men's Alliance podcast. I'm Dave Mills Goose, and with me today is Mike Flynn, Whisperer. Mike, welcome.
Thank you.
Back to the Men's Alliance podcast. This is like your third or fourth podcast with us, and
you had dark hair on my first one.
I had short hair and clean shaven and was active duty.
Yeah.
And so today, Mike's going to be talking with us on the topic of respectful listening and how to be a good listener. Something that I think most people think that they're good at and think it comes naturally, but it's actually a learned skill. So, Mike, first of all, what do you mean by respectful listening? What does that mean to you?
Respectful listening completes the communication loop. Someone is talking, and if someone's paying attention, a focused attention, and giving honor to the speaker, then you have a communication loop. If no one's listening, you know the old story about if a tree fell in the woods and no one was there to hear it, would there be a sound? Well, there would be sound waves, but there'd be no hearing because there's no ear, no listener, no hearer. And so respectful listening involves practicing self-coaching and practicing paying attention. The Chinese symbol for listening involves listening with your eyes, listening with your ears, listening with full attention, listening with your heart. And what's really interesting is listening as the speaker, treating the speaker as the king of the conversation, giving a full respect to the speaker, whether it's your child, your friend, your spouse, somebody you disagree with or agree with, an employer, employee, whoever is talking. If you're respectfully listening, communication takes place. And often the hard things can be mitigated. The hard things can be minimized. I'm going to tell a story a little bit later about an experience I had in the Army with that working.
Okay. Yeah, I'm interested to hear how it minimizes the hard things. That sounds interesting. One of the things you just said was listen with your eyes. And I think that's so important, right? If we're not listening with our eyes,
Right.
I feel like the person's not listening to me. I feel like they're thinking about something else. They've drifted off. And so definitely listen with your eyes.
If you've ever been at a function, a group activity, and you're trying to talk to somebody and he or she is looking over your shoulder, they're not listening. Now, they may have attention deficit disorder and haven't learned how to coach themselves to focus.
Right.
Or they could just be a jerk, but probably not. They probably are unaware of how rude that actually is. And when you have been in a conversation with someone, particularly in a group, and they're very focused on you, on what you're saying, that's powerful. You want to get with that person again. You're attracted to that. And so know that when you give that to someone, that focus, listening with your eyes, your ears, your heart, your focus, treating the speaker as important as a king, people are going to love that. And you need it, and you need to receive it. You need to give that focus, and you need to receive it regularly.
Man, when we started talking about this podcast, when we started talking about this topic, I was instantly thinking about how to be a better listener around the Men's Alliance fire. Like when you've been talking about respectful listening, I've been completely thinking about within the context of a tribe. And we were talking over lunch about people being on their phone. right? And if you're talking, if you're sharing a devotion or whatever, and somebody's on their phone, even if they're like reading the Bible verse
Right.
that you're talking about, you don't know that. And so you look around the fire and you see a guy on his phone, it can be distracting. But now hearing you say what you just said about it treats them like a king, and we have the need to be heard like that, you got me thinking about the context of a marriage too.
Absolutely.
And the way we listen at home to our wives
and to our children. Even when we're tired, even when we have other things on our mind, if we don't give the gift of listening, we're not going to be a good husband and a good dad. You can't be a quality husband and dad and not give the gift of listening. The way I think about it, that shows up among in a small group discussion. It could be a Bible study, it could be a men's alliance group, it could be a gathering, is that if you go to church and the pastor has prepared a sermon, how many of you are going to get up and say, "Excuse me, Pastor, but I want to add this to what God told you to say this morning, because this is more important."
Yeah.
Or you didn't say enough and I'm going to, straighten it out. But we'll do that in a small group.
Right.
Hijack the conversation. Now, in church, we wouldn't do it, but somehow we'll allow ourselves to interrupt, hijack the conversation, give a mini devotional on top of
our own.
Yeah. So what I think about is when a person says yes, Dave Mills says to you, "Hey, would you give the devotion at Men's Alliance?" What are you going to do at that point if you say yes? You're going to prepare. You're going to typically pray and ask for guidance for what the topic should be and what the specifics should be. You're going to prepare references and sources of information relevant to the topic. You're going to prepare to provide the information to a specific audience of listeners or receivers for a specific amount of time. You're not going to drone on for an hour, and for a specific event. So if the man or woman who's leading the discussion does all that preparedness with the influence of the Holy Spirit, you should honor it and respect it. In human interaction, there's a concept, less is more.
Yeah.
That's a powerful statement. Less is more. If there's a prepared message, something that needs to be said, it's not your business to give a mini second lecture. In fact, it's your business not to. Yeah.
Me and Thor, we were talking about this morning about listening, and he was jokingly saying it's okay to have a thought come into your mind that you don't say out loud.
As a matter of fact,
even a really good thought.
As a matter of fact, I have a nephew who's runs a special ed department in Brooklyn. And almost every day he says to his students that very phrase, says, "Students," this is a bunch of hyperactive, kids with learning issues, challenges. "Students, just because you think it, you don't have to say it."
That's good. I like it. And you can tell guys around the fire, you can see it in guys that they just instantly thought of something,
right?
And then they're blurting it out, and sometimes it does derail the conversation or move it in a different direction or move it backwards.
It dilutes it.
Yeah,
it disrespects it. Just like you wouldn't disrespect your pastor, very few people would. You shouldn't disrespect the guy or girl who's doing a leadership discussion. Or your conversation with your 13-year-old daughter who's upset because the way the other girls are treating her. You wouldn't disrespect her. And by the way, as a sideline, you're the dad of 2 girls, and you know this very well, that if you show respect to your daughters, whatever their issues are, no matter how immature it seems to you, if you listen, you pay attention, guess what you're training her to attract into her adult life?
Yeah.
A husband who will give her the same thing.
Man, that is so important, right? And that's something that we've talked about a lot in other areas, but I haven't thought about that for listening.
Oh, man.
We talk about at the Warrior Princess father-daughter campout, we talked with the dads about however you treat your daughter,
Exactly.
that is going to become her baseline expectation of how a man should treat her. So, if you're rude to her, then she will date a guy who is rude to her. Right. So this is a wake up call for a lot of dads, but I've never really applied that to listening. So if you're not listening well to your daughter's stories, she's going to attract a guy who doesn't listen because she'll think that that's okay and normal.
She'll go to what's familiar.
Yeah. And, you said something else in there too, is even if her problems seem immature, seem silly. I had somebody say this to me. I heard someone say this a couple years ago, that even if their problem is silly to you, it's huge to them, right? If it's huge to them, that's all that matters. This little immature problem, that's the biggest problem they've got going on in their life.
That's right.
So it's not going to help them at all for us to minimize it.
And it's not really about whatever the problem is. It's about being heard.
Yeah.
And having that experience with the most important man in the daughter's life, or a son's life, but the most important man, giving them that respectful listening, because that's what they're going to find familiar to attract. They're going to be attracted to that as an adult, and you want that.
And, I bet a lot of men are probably really good listeners when it comes to listening at work to their supervisor or boss or commander. I bet they're really good at listening with their eyes.
Yeah.
When they're at work. And then that same guy, I can see him coming home and staring at the TV going, yeah, I'm listening.
Exactly.
It's like, well, you would never listen that disrespectfully at work, but then you're going to disrespect your wife with that kind of listening.
And that gets into a whole nother conversation we can have at another time, but it's my experience that men treat their wives and children on the basis, the same level that they feel about themselves. If they don't feel like they're worth listening to, they're not going to listen to their kids. And that's a whole nother topic. Men's Alliance addresses that because Men's Alliance helps men to gain a different sense of who they are as a person. And maybe we can talk about how to kick in the head lies told to us as children about who we are.
Well, that's really powerful.
Yeah, we can have that conversation.
Okay.
I wanted to just a couple of things, Army stories.
Yeah.
In the Army, there's a concept called ACE, ACE. The first part of ACE, the A is ask. If you have a friend and you notice that they're shutting down, they're isolating, they're withdrawing, they're not functioning, ask them what's going on. Don't be afraid to ask because people need to be asked. But then the C is care enough to listen. ACE, ask, care, to listen. And then if you determine, and you don't have to be a mental health professional, if you determine this person's at risk of self-harm or harming someone else, escort. That's the E. Escort them to care. And when I was in the Army in the 60s, during Vietnam, the mental health services on post was ahead of the civilian public mental health services, certainly in the eastern part of the United States anyway. So ask, care, escort. And that would be true, wouldn't it, with your friend out in civilian life or with your fellow worker. I'm going to tell you a little story about 1969, a story at Fort Drum, New York. I was working as a 91 G20 Army psychologist at Fort Lee, and the call came in to send someone to Fort Drum for the summer for 8 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever it was. There were going to be 10,000 troops and one mental health guy, and that was me. And being the ADHD guy that I am, I said, I'll go.
I got this.
I got this. It was one of the best experiences I had. I was on call 24/7, with the pager and all that stuff. And we had a makeshift hospital. Well, this gets into respectful listening, and you'll notice real quickly why. I got a call at night from the MPs, get over here. We got a guy who's gone off, threatening to kill people and whip people's butts or worse. And we got him in the container. They had a storage steel container next to the makeshift hospital.
Oh, man.
That's where they put you. And so I get over there, and the MP, and he's in there with the door closed, the guy. And the MPs say, please, whatever you do, you're going in there, Mr. Army psychologist, and don't ask us to get hands on him and bring him back out and put him in the hospital. Please don't ask us to do that. So I walk in, The guy immediately stares at me and takes his shirt off
Oh, geez.
and poses as bring it on.
Yeah.
He was 14 times bigger than me. He was a big guy, just got back from Vietnam.
Yeah.
At that time in the Vietnam War, if you had like 60, 90 days left or 120 days left, he brought you from combat and stuck you in anywhere they could stick you to live out your time. And to put a guy in with a bunch of weekend warriors, with a bunch of guys from Philadelphia who are Army reservists, who were shooting off M16s up in the air next to him.
Oh my gosh.
You got problems.
Yeah.
So what did I do? I engaged in respectful listening. I said, what do you want to happen? And he just opened up and told me how, triggered all, we didn't call it PTSD in those days. We still call it combat fatigue, but I knew exactly what was going on. And, well, what do you want? Well, I want to go home. I want to get the hell out of here. And so I said, well, I'll tell you what, let's do this. If you'll cooperate with me, I got to work the system. If you'll cooperate with me this evening, I'll get you out here tomorrow morning. After I had to let him talk. I couldn't have all the answers. I couldn't try to say, no, you behave yourself. You're a soldier. No, I needed to hear his story. No matter how long it took, I gave him eyes, ears, heart, and treated him like a king. So he even allowed us to give him a tranquilizer to calm him down. After he had calmed down, he allowed us so he could sleep, so he could get through the night. We then transported him very calm to the next door, to the hospital. The next day, I did what I told him I was going to do. I sent him home.
Wow.
And that was a learning experience for me that this stuff works.
Yeah.
And I've heard some TED Talks lately about some guys who do that sort of thing regularly with warring factions in third world countries, where they get people to listen to one another.
Yeah.
And if it works in those settings, it's going to work in your everyday experience.
Oh my gosh. That's a very powerful story. Being put in a shipping container
In July.
With a guy with severe PTSD. It really does highlight the fact that people have a need to be heard. And they might not, I would say most of the time even, they probably don't even know that they have that big need. They just know something's wrong.
Yeah.
Something's wrong and everybody's pissing them off.
Yeah.
And nobody's doing the right thing. Well, what's the right thing for people to do? I don't know. Something other than what you're doing right now, but it's then like once they come in contact with a respectful listener and they start speaking their story, things start to smooth out. They're processing it. They're
de-escalates.
Yeah.
But here's something you need to do when you're like before that situation. And if you're the next time any of you are in a tense situation or an interaction with somebody that you're not completely comfortable about, take a minute and listen to yourself. How am I feeling? I'm feeling anxious. Okay, I can own that and dismiss it. What am I thinking? Am I thinking about the tools I have, the things I know work? Have I said a prayer to God? Go in this with me. Listen to yourself first. And then you can listen to the other person respectfully and with the eyes, ears, heart, and focus. That's a powerful part of this.
What's an example of somebody not listening to themselves? Like what's something that a person might be feeling or thinking that they might miss if they are not pausing to listen to themselves?
Well, they might miss anxiousness or at a level that prevents them from thinking well. That interferes with recall of things learned that have worked in the past or they've read or heard about. Because a lot of us have tons of information in our head that we don't use in this human interaction process. So they might miss the fact that they can catastrophize. It's easy to think, oh, this is going to be the worst thing that ever happened when it doesn't have to be that way. Or they might be over-focused on, a lot of times people don't listen and communicate effectively because they're not sure what to say.
Right.
And they, especially in an acute grief situation.
I think that's so true for so many men is if we don't know what the right thing to say is, we're just going to not say anything.
Yeah.
And that's terrible. Right.
Exactly. Or we might not want to listen very long because we feel so uncomfortable in that moment.
Mm-hmm. What do you recommend that a guy say? And this is like, I think the situation that pops into my mind is being like the most uncomfortable and awkward, and I don't know what to say when I'm at like either the hospital to see a guy, to visit a buddy, or at a funeral where a friend of mine has lost a loved one. I'd say like in the hospital and at the funeral, those are two areas.
Yeah.
What can a man say to another man there?
I would rather emphasize that he doesn't have to say anything.
Okay.
I was in a hospital with my nephew whose wife and daughter had just been killed in a car wreck. And I'd been a counselor that was years ago, but I was a counselor by that point, 45 years, always knowing how to talk to people, but I had nothing. Not one word would come to mind to say to my nephew, but I was there. I gave him presence. I was there in person and I was listening. He didn't have a lot to say either. And that's more important than what to say.
Yeah.
Is practicing being present, which involves listening and eye contact and connection that's read by the speaker or the grieving person. That's much more important than, so often we think we got to say just the right thing. There's no just right thing to say.
Well, that's a good reminder. Just sit with them for a while.
Yeah. You can always talk later, but the last thing they need are easy answers for complex questions.
Yeah. Boy, that's good. Hey guys, is money holding you back from being used by God? If finances are a problem in your life and you're looking for some help, some counsel, some assistance financially, you've got to check out the Main Street Group. It's run by Tom Love, call sign Doc, with Tuckahoe Tribe. Okay, Doc is a certified financial planner. He's a fee-only fiduciary. He's a Dave Ramsey SmartVestor Pro. He uses Charles Schwab assets. He will help get you on course in ways that you didn't even know you were off course. He's not just a sponsor of the podcast, but my wife Carrie and I, we use him for our finances personally. He's helped us a ton. He's been ranked number 2 in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, number 1 in Style Weekly. He's a top 40 under 40 investor. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes. He is the man to see to get you on course financially. God saved Tom spiritually and physically, and God is the reason for Tom's success, and he wants to help others succeed also. So whenever you go see Tom Love, a.k.a. Doc, don't forget to mention that you are a part of Men's Alliance, and he will donate your first year of fees back to Men's Alliance nonprofit 501c3. So he's not only helping you, but he's helping our ministry as well. So do yourself a favor, go see the Main Street Group with Tom Love. It's in the show notes. Check it out. And as always, Dave Ramsey and Charles Schwab are separate entities, and past performance is no guarantee of future results. Check him out, the Main Street Group, Tom Love. What's this idea that you touched on earlier about less is more?
Okay,
Seems to be almost to that same idea.
It is. Let's talk about Jesus' interaction with the boys, the teenagers or young adults, fishermen.
Yeah.
Even though Peter was married and had a mother-in-law, God bless him. Maybe that's why Peter knew he needed a savior. Jesus understood man's limited capacity to process detailed information. Man's limited capacity to process detailed information. And so, the Lord's Prayer is brief.
Yeah.
What is it that he would say? He would say, follow me, take and eat, love your neighbor, feed my sheep, draw a drink of water from me, become like little children. Those aren't lengthy sermons.
Right.
Those aren't 3-point sermons. Those are less is more.
Those read like sentences from a Hemingway book.
Exactly.
You don't need a dictionary.
Less is more. And it's powerful.
That's right.
And that's how Jesus interacted with people, and even with the Pharisees and the bad guys. He had brief responses. So that's where I think the less is more Don't try to overdo. And so let's talk about, we're sitting around a table or a campfire, and I'm getting ready to do a men's retreat on my farm on rebellious prayer.
I like that title.
That's another topic. Maybe we can do a talk on that. When you're listening to the guy doing the devotions, the guy or gal, if you're in that, you give them this respectful listening, and you coach yourself. You actively talk to yourself, and you ask yourself some questions, which might be, am I wanting to talk because I have something relevant and constructive to say? Or do I just have an unmet need to be heard? And I want to speak to that. I want to talk about the unmet need to be heard. But the other next question is, am I wanting to say these things to assist the devotion for the benefit of the receivers? Or am I just trying to give a second mini devotional? That's good. That's disrespectful if you decide, oh, I got to add to what this guy has prepared to do, and I'm just, for the moment, I'm going to just hog the conversation. Now, let's talk about when the speaker says, now, what do you guys think about this? Then respond to that question. But don't go off on your life story or your view of something. Coach yourself. Ask yourself, is this going to be productive for everyone, or does it just make me feel good to say it?
Can you say those questions again that we should ask ourselves?
Well, the first question that I failed to mention is, who put me in charge of the world?
I've heard you ask that question a lot.
So that's the first question, and the answer will be no one. The second question is, am I wanting to talk because I have something relevant and constructive to say, or do I have an unmet need to be heard?
I think just pausing on that one is very powerful. I think a lot of men could benefit in self-awareness from asking that question. We might not realize, man, I do. I think I just need to be heard. Nobody's listening to me at work. Nobody's listening to me at home. Maybe I've got this big need. And I think if a man can sit on that question for a second and be honest with himself, he might really, have a breakthrough in an area that he didn't know he needed one.
And it is a legitimate need to be heard.
Exactly.
As you just indicated. Probably, if a man is, let's say, 40 years old and he has an unmet need to be heard, it's because he was trained as a child that his needs and thoughts weren't important. And he probably grew up being attracted to the kind of relationship that gives that to him. That same message, your needs aren't important.
Yeah. So some kids grow up hearing the message, be quiet, shut up. Nobody wants to hear from you. No, who do you think you are? You don't have anything to say here, and then they internalize that. Like, that's who I am.
That's right.
I have no right to speak anywhere. Nobody ever wants to hear from me.
And so they have a legitimate, unmet need to be heard. So what do you do about that? Outside of the context of the small group, you get with one or two buddies on a very regular basis, and you listen to them respectfully, and they listen to you. You get heard by one another. That's powerful. That's an outgrowth of the small group experience that you learn. Hey, I can open up in a group discussion. I can respond to the guy's question. I don't have to take over the conversation, but I can be safe and be open. And then outside of this group, I'm going to get with one or two guys, and we're going to talk to one another about whatever we need to say and be heard. So that need is legitimate, but the context is just like you wouldn't get it met on Sunday morning during church.
Right.
You wouldn't get it met hopefully at the reception dinner at your daughter's wedding or something, right? It's the venue, it's the appropriate place. But the need should be addressed.
So that makes me think the guy with the unmet need to be heard probably is not getting together weekly with a couple good friends.
Almost assuredly.
He's probably isolated.
Exactly.
Or one or two superficial, coworkers, friendships. This made me want to hit on this. Our leadership guide, the Men's Alliance Leadership Guide. And if you're listening to this and you don't know we have this, shame on you if you're in a tribe. So you need to go to your tribe's webpage on our website, you find your tribe's webpage, and at the bottom of it, there are several documents. The first of which is the leadership guide. And we have 10 rules in Men's Alliance. Everybody knows rule 1. Everybody knows rule 1 in Men's Alliance is don't die. But not as many people know rule 3. Rule 3 in Men's Alliance is listen more than you talk. Share what's on your mind and then be quiet and listen to others. Nobody likes a blatherskite.
I love it.
Yeah. So everything you're saying is actually one of our rules. This is so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that if you go to a gathering that's all head knowledge, you're just learning, doing a book study, or even just learning about the Bible, but it's all head knowledge, and you don't ever get into your personal issues, and you don't develop a relationship. You can be in that kind of group for 20 years and never let anyone get to know you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good trick. I've had men say, I don't need your men's groups anymore because I'm in a group at my church.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are you doing? Well, we're studying a book, and we're building a deck for people who need a deck. And that's all good.
Great.
Do that.
Yeah.
But that ain't what we do in our men's groups, and it's not what MA does.
Right.
You can hide out behind those kinds of activities for years.
That's right. Men hide in those groups their whole life.
Yeah.
You know, and it looks good on paper. They're always at church. They're always involved in a couple's small group or something,
Yep.
you know, leading a men's Bible study, cooking at the men's breakfast. But not one single man in the world knows their struggles.
That's right. And that's where you get into big trouble. As Men's Alliance teaches, don't isolate. Isolation is death.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the men that I've read about and known about and heard about who had extreme moral failures and lost their ministries or lost their family, they were all isolated from other men. There was no exception that I've ever heard of. And, you know, I've told this story so many times, but I'll tell it again. Billy Graham's grandson who took over DJ Kennedy's church in Florida. That's a pretty big deal, right?
Oh, yeah.
If you get to be that guy, that's a pretty big deal. Well, he obviously was, like many pastors and ministry leaders, more married to his ministry than he was his wife. He goes on a missions trip. He comes back from the missions trip and somebody says, your wife's having an affair. Does he go to the 2 guys in his Men's Alliance tribe and tell them how hurting he is?
I hope so.
He didn't, because he didn't have that sort of
That's
transparency.
Right.
Maybe he didn't know about that kind of transparency, because this was a few years ago. He may not have lived around that sort of opportunity. He didn't have it. He goes and talks to a woman. Guess what? He has an affair with her.
Yep. And
he loses everything. I mean, that's just one story out of too many of big name people who made bad choices because they hadn't put themselves in a position to be listened to be heard. Maybe they didn't know that they could. But that's what we're trying to do today, isn't it?
Right.
Is teach men that it is important to listen to others and be listened to, and do it with focus and do it with heart.
And you said, coach yourself.
Coach yourself, because it's not natural. As you said in the beginning, yeah. You may never have learned this. I'll tell you something I've been observing is Amish families. I work often with Amish peat farmers at my place in Buckingham, and I watch how differently they parent than the way I grew up on farms. They don't criticize and yell at their kids. I've never seen them demean, criticize, or yell at their kids, ever. And it's really wonderful to watch it. And it's a good lesson for the rest of us, how they listen to their kids, they watch their kids, and they make very subtle, less is more kinds of comments and suggestions. And, I don't know what they do when I'm not around or in their private home, but I think they'd be doing the same thing in front of me if they were doing it at home. They're very patient, and they listen respectfully to one another, and especially between the dads and the children.
Wow, that's awesome.
We need to learn more about that.
So going back to when the person leading the devotion asks a question.
Yeah.
And there's that long silence, which I love.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes, and one thing we tell leaders is let that silence sit there.
Yes.
Don't rush to fill it. Let the awkward silence settle in. Give time for the fire.
Good.
And
good.
Men are thinking. it's like you've been preparing for this great question all week,
Right.
but we just got it. And so I'm always thinking that I hope the devotion leader does not think that the silence means it was a bad question.
Exactly.
Right? Sometimes the silent means it's such a great question. Whoa, we need a second.
Exactly.
We need a second to think about this. So then you have something to share, and let's say you do those steps, you self-coach, you're like, okay, do I want to say this just to be heard, or do I really think that this will contribute meaningfully, that the men here need to hear it? So you're like, yep, that's it. Okay, this one passes the test.
Yeah.
I'm going to say this. You say it, and then you stop.
Exactly.
You don't try to take over.
No. And what I'm going to say to the Charlie tribe when I give this devotion is be humble enough to realize you're in the tribe and you have people there to help you. You do not struggle alone. To say to somebody, one guy, hey, if you notice that I'm getting us off topic, if you notice that I'm hijacking, would you please just give me nudge me? I'll give you permission, and if you want that from me, I'll give that to you.
That is a great idea. That's brilliant.
It would really help. And you don't want to discourage guys from opening up, but you want to protect the integrity of the event.
Man, that's so true. Yeah. Wow.
There's one other thing, too, that is a little tricky, and we're not expecting devotion leaders, fire pit guys to become mental health professionals. They're not therapy sessions. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just have that gut feeling that this guy's saying too much too soon, try to find a graceful way. Be in charge. If you're the leader, you are in charge. If somebody says something inappropriate, you would say, hey, we don't do that here.
Right.
And that's your responsibility, whoever the leader is, not necessarily the devotion giver, but the leader would be responsible for how that goes in.
Yeah.
If you just sense this guy's opening up too deeply, this is not a mental health session, he could have that conversation outside of here in another venue, then it's your responsibility to help him stop.
Yeah.
And that's tricky.
It is tricky. And that's one of the things you and I were talking about earlier today is we've seen men show up at Men's Alliance and their first time they share everything.
Yeah.
They share too much too fast. And while actually, like, as just a dude sitting around the fire, I'm totally okay with that. I'm like, wow, this guy's diving right in. He's really feels like he's fitting in. But from the guy's perspective, and this was something psychologically going on with that guy that I hadn't thought about till you and I were discussing it. That guy goes home and he feels embarrassed.
Yeah.
Because he's like, oh man, what did I just do? I just unloaded everything. And I don't even know those guys. So now he's too embarrassed to come back.
True,
So the very guy who you thought, oh, this guy's incredible, he's sharing everything, he's all in.
Yeah.
That's the guy that you are likely in danger of never seeing again.
Exactly. And he might never go to another scenario where he is asked to open up. He might go hide behind a book study and check it off and say, hey, guess what? I'm in a men's group. The other part is we were talking about it in the physical fitness, the workout part.
Right.
Often when I used to run those all the time, a guy would come in and just overdo everything.
Yeah.
And he doesn't ever come back.
Trying to impress sometimes.
He probably hurt himself. Probably had to have hernia surgery.
Go all out. So you can err by going all out physically and kind of emotionally too much too soon in either category, right?
And I would even say that the tribe leader has a responsibility to say to people, hey, you know your body better than we do. If you got something, part of you that's broken or something that's hurting you, stop doing it.
Yeah.
We're not here for you to hurt yourself. And I feel like each workout ought to start out with that kind of message.
Yeah. I like telling everybody, you won't impress any of us by how many burpees you were doing right before you passed out.
Very good. I like
if you go too far, you've just ruined everything you were working towards, right? It's just better to just, be the tortoise.
Yeah.
Just do what you can do. It's you against you. Give yourself a good workout, get your heart rate up.
Yeah.
But don't push yourself into the red.
Exactly.
And that kind of is also true for the devotion.
It is
right?
exactly true.
Kind of pace yourself there.
Yeah.
And don't give too much too soon there either.
I've noticed at age 77, all of a sudden I'm pretty good at being the tortoise.
You're getting good at it. I was just thinking of this question too while you were saying your last point. One thing that I see sometimes guys do is just flat out interrupt. There's just interrupting, right?
Exactly.
Which I think we all kind of know that that's a bad manner.
It is rude.
It's rude.
It's disrespectful.
And it kind of says, hey, I've got something better than what you have. You stop. I have something more important to say. And what do you have to say to our guys that are interrupters?
Self-coaching and have your buddy tap you in the elbow. Yeah. Invite your buddy to help you with that. That's good stuff. When iron sharpens iron right there. Help a guy learn how not to do that. Help a guy learn to be a respectful listener. It'll change his life.
That's great. That is awesome advice. I think that as Men's Alliance guys, as tribesmen, as we become better listeners, it's going to elevate everything that happens around the fire.
Exactly.
Like if you're talking, if you're giving a devotion and you've got 8 or 9 guys around that fire looking back at you, active listening, engaged, listening with their whole body,
right?
And you're feeling heard. And then you ask a question and a guy gives an answer because it's relevant to the whole group, and then he stops. Man, it's just like, that's going to be a powerful night.
That's exactly what we're after.
And then when you take these same concepts home, you're going to have a better marriage. You're going to raise your kids better.
Well, guess what happens when you're attentive to your wife? 99% of the time, there are times when your wife's got psychological issues where she can't give back. But generally speaking, if you're attentive to your wife, she's going to respond by being attentive.
Yeah.
And wherever you want to go with that.
And we all want that.
In your plan. You want to be heard, and your wife wants to be heard. And that's part of love. That's loving somebody with respectful listening. We ought to put that in the wedding vows, right?
Oh,
to have and to hold and to be listened to.
I'll tell you, if we could start training men like we're trying to do right now in this podcast, if we can train men to be better listeners, that will fix so many marriage problems. A lot of relationship problems are coming from the lack of listening, and you don't get yourself to that point without sitting down together, right? Or going for a walk together. So you got to spend time with her in order to have the opportunity to listen to her. So you got to be going for a walk together or sitting on the porch together or going out for dinner together to have created the time so that she can talk and share and open up so that you can be a good listener.
And the timing, like you mentioned, the timing of that is so important, is to figure out a time that works for both of you.
Yeah.
That's important.
Oh, that's so important. So that, nobody's too tired.
When my boys were home, when they'd get home from school, how was your day? Fine.
Yeah.
How you doing? Fine. That's all I could get. But about 10 o'clock at night, when I wanted to be asleep, I'd go into their room and I could hear the story. Then the timing, they could talk then.
That's right. I remember this advice you gave me years ago was whenever your kids start talking, you start listening.
Exactly.
Like you were saying, it doesn't matter how tired you are.
Right.
If they start talking at 11 p.m.,
you listen.
You're listening at 11 p.m.
That's right.
Because man, that's a precious window of opportunity that they've just given you.
And as
if you blow that one.
And as you know, and I know, and others, they grow up so fast.
Yeah.
Right. And I just went to a high school a graduation family party with some friends. And they talked about how fast the 18, 19 years have gone.
Yeah.
And you know that. And so do I.
Man, incredible. Well, I love that we just did this topic.
Good.
How amazing is it that we hadn't already thought of this one? We should have done this a long time ago, but thank you for bringing this up.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing this to my attention and for sharing your insight about listening. This is something that, like I said at the beginning, this seems simple, easy, and obvious, and it's not. Most of us are bad at it, and it's hurting our relationships because of it. So, guys, we are going to put in these show notes these questions that Mike gave us to ask ourselves before we speak. And then keep in mind rule number 3. After you share something, close your mouth and become a listener again instead of trying to take over or redirect the devotion. And really ask yourself, is this because maybe I have an unmet need to be heard that I need to be looking in another area of my life, maybe more male friendships, or maybe it's communicating with my wife to be heard so that I don't feel like I have to be heard every night around the fire.
Good.
So
Excellent.
So many good things from here. And man, this makes me more fired up than ever to go put this stuff into practice at the tribe. And that's where I'll see you guys around the fire. Hey guys, I've got a great announcement to make. This is unlike any announcement we've ever made. Everybody knows that what we do in Men's Alliance is only possible because of the support we get. We are not funded by any big organization. We are funded grassroots by tribesmen. It's just Men's Alliance dudes who flip tires and build fires every week, giving a little bit each month that makes what we do possible. We're now well over 100 tribes in 21 states. So that means we're almost halfway there, right? We need tribes in every city. And this is what is the most important thing we're doing is we're changing the way Christian masculinity, the way biblical manhood in this country is viewed. We're changing it one fire at a time. And we can't do that without you guys' support. And you guys have been awesome at it. Over these past 12 months, we've been able to actually start paying part-time staff. So that means we've got guys who are waking up in the morning and doing MA. And that is a dream come true. And we want to keep this going. We want to keep growing. My goal is for there to be a tribe within a 30-minute drive of 90% of the men in America. And I think that we can do that. I think that can happen. But again, nothing happens without every tribesman rowing in the same direction. We ask that everybody give $5-10 a month. $27.17 a month is what we ask if you can. But today on this podcast, I want to recognize our tribesmen, our men, and some women who are giving at and above even that, who are giving at what we call our patch level, that being $93 a month. And we say $93 a month because that reminds us of the statistic that when a man, when the husband, when the father comes to Christ first, there's a 93% chance that his whole family will follow. That's why it's so important. You target the men, you go after the men, you get them, you get the whole family, 93% chance. So for everybody that gives $93 a month, that's what we call our patch level donors. And I wanted to take a minute on this podcast to recognize them because this is so important. So I was amazed when I looked at the spreadsheet to find that people have names given by their mother. Apparently, these are birth certificate names, not call signs, which means you won't recognize anybody. So it's super anonymous when we don't use call signs. But I got to recognize those who are giving at an extraordinary level to Men's Alliance every month. These are our recurring donors: George Allen, Andrew Flame, Adam Ashman, Seamus Higgins, April Campana, Jeremy Oliver, Brandon Young, Sam Wagman, Justin Wilson, Ray Wagman, Stephanie Smith, Matt Spencer, Scotty Maynard, Steven Serio, Todd Kuhn, Dustin Miller, Jeff Fantel, Garrett Pyle, Carl Hultgren, Dustin Parker, Rick Mullis, Ryan Baker, Ross Marshall, Connor Dillingham, Derek McMaster, Karen Beatty, Aaron Hill, Kevin Lopez, Matt Krantz, Tom Love, and Kevin Nentwich. Thank you guys so much for giving at and above, you know, what is normal, what is typical, because you guys are investing to help us grow. If you guys can only give 5, 10, 20 bucks a month, please do it. When we get 1 million men giving $1 a month, we'll be unstoppable. And that is what's going to change the landscape in this country. We all know that Christianity is under attack in America. We all know that masculinity is under attack in America. So that means we are behind enemy lines. We are engaged in guerrilla warfare. With every fire, every week, with every workout, with every devotion, we are working to turn that tide. Men find out about Men's Alliance through this podcast, and it's your financial support every month that helps us grow this podcast. So thank you very much. Thank you guys for donating. If you're not donating, please go to our website, men'salliancetribe.com, and support us with whatever you're able to do. Thank you. To find out more about what we're doing and to join us on our mission, go to men'salliancetribe.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a 5-star review.